Hello, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is a daily analysis of the Ukrainian front. So friends, good news continues to come from the front. Over the past day, 3 more settlements came under the control of the Russian army. Accordingly, Ukraine lost 3 more settlements. At the same time, the situation for the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, continues to worsen, both in Pokrovsk and on the left bank of the Oskol River. Here, for example, several units of the Ukrainian armed forces tried to withdraw to the right bank yesterday, but Russian intelligence tracked the construction of pontoon crossings in the Kovsharovka area in time. After which aviation worked on this crossing, the AFU suffered, quite significant losses. More than 50 of their fighters were killed. Another part scattered, and Russian drones were already working on them. What is the situation here? The AFU missed the moment when they could have withdrawn from the left bank without losses. Now, only under the blows of Russian aviation and drones can they get out of this pocket, and it will not be without losses. At the same time, as I told you in yesterday's issue, Russian fighters are also trying to cut this large pocket into 2 parts. And yesterday, closer to the evening, data appeared that the AFU had withdrawn from Kurilovka. This is a large village, and it is now with the Russian army. This means that Russian troops have reached the settlement of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. And this is as serious as possible, since from these positions to Oskol, it is only 2.5 kilometers. And therefore, if it is possible to reach the Oskol, then this entire section with Petropavlovka, Kucherovka and Podoli will be physically blocked. But here I will make a reservation. The data that Kurilovka is on the Russian side still needs additional clarification, as it was provided by a source that, let's say, has already provided not entirely correct information. Nevertheless, what is known for sure is that there were battles in Kurilovka, and we reached the center, and there were corresponding shots of Russian fighters installing a flag on one of the houses in the center of Kurilovka. So control over all of Kurilovka is not impossible, but I will clarify further. In addition to the problems in the Kupiansk sector, the AFU also has problems in Volchansk. Yesterday, information was received, already from a reliable source, that the fighters had advanced a little here and reached the crossroads in the Semelnikov area. Plus, the western part of Volchansk, according to information from this source, has also been completely cleared. Accordingly, the AFU in Volchansk controls less than 30% of the city. And according to the current trend, most likely by the end of the year, Volchansk will come under full Russian control. However, all this is nonsense compared to what problems the AFU are brewing in the south. I'm not even talking about Pokrovsk, but about the Zaporizhzhia region, about the Huliaipol sector, where no one is able to stop the Vostok group. So let's first discuss the advance in the area of responsibility of the Vostok group. Because the advances there are excellent. And then I'll say a few words about the situation in Pokrovsk. So what is happening here? And here in the Zaporizhzhia region, the fighters managed to occupy 2 villages at once, and importantly, on both sides of the Yancha River. On the eastern side of the river, the fighters advanced 2 kilometers, 800 meters, and occupied the village of Privolnoye. The fighters provided footage from the village with flags. Now the situation here is such that on the eastern bank of the Yancha, it remains to take control of only the village of Krasnogorskoye. And that's it. The entire eastern bank of the Yancha in the Zaporizhzhia region will be cleared. Moreover, Russian fighters are already being recorded on the outskirts of Krasnogorskoye, and given the configuration of the front that has developed here, and here, you see, yes, a mini pocket, so to speak. Therefore, it is unlikely that the AFU will be able to resist for a long time. The neck of the exit here is 2.5 kilometers, and if they have no desire to stay in this settlement forever, then they should have left the village yesterday. According to the second settlement taken under control, this is the village of Novonikolaevka. Those who watched my issues remember that I told you a few days ago that the fighters had informed me about the capture of the village, but yesterday this became official information, and objective control footage was also received, which confirms that the village is 100% under Russian control. What is important here? What is important here is that this village is already on the western bank of the Yancha River. That is, the defense line that runs along the Yancha River here has been broken in one more place, Well, and de facto, it only remains to finish off Uspanovka, and that's it. The defense line will cease to exist. But then again, given the configuration of the front, and from the south Uspanovka is now blocked, and from the north with the capture of Privolnoye, there will also be direct access to the village, it is unlikely that the AFU garrison will be able to hold back the onslaught for a long time. Yes, in comparison with other settlements, Uspanovka is a rather large village. For understanding, the length of the village along the river is 5 kilometers, and the pre-war population here was almost 1,500 people. Nevertheless, I somehow believe in the fighters of the Vostok group. Nothing can stop them, and this has been proven more than once. Therefore, maybe they will delay the Russian army in Uspanovka for a week. Maybe for a week and a half, but hardly longer. So I think that by the 10th of November, the village will already be under Russian control. And therefore, by November 10th, the last line of defense will be broken, and a full-fledged movement to Huliaipol will begin. However, the successes of the Vostok group did not end there. There was also an advance further north in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Here, the fighters advanced on a section more than 6 kilometers wide. The advance in depth was 3 kilometers, and the village of Yegorovka was also taken under control. True, here there are still some questions about the northern part of the village, since the southern part, yes, there is Russian control, that's for sure, but there was no objective, control footage from the northern part of Yegorovka. Nevertheless, in any case, even if only the southern part of Yegorovka is under Russian control, the AFU has big problems. Of what kind? Like this. There are now less than 6 kilometers left to the Pokrovskoye-Huliaipol highway, and if the Russian troops really occupied all of Yegorovka, then it is only 3.5 kilometers to the highway. And in both cases, the AFU can no longer use this road to supply its garrison in Huliaipol. And if they try to slip through there, well, it's understandable that the equipment will be burned by Russian drones. But the day is not far off when the highway will be physically cut. Which of course will not nullify the entire logistics of Huliaipol, since there is also the Orekov-Huliaipol highway, but it will greatly complicate it, since the Orekov-Huliaipol highway is also well shot through in some sections. In general, despite the reserves transferred here a few weeks ago, and such information appeared that they had strengthened or rather replenished this section, still they did not stop the Vostok group. In addition to the occupied Yegorovka, there was also an advance to the southern outskirts of Vyshnevoye. Well, and as you can see, it was possible to advance here 1 kilometer, 800 meters along the forest plantation and reach the outbuildings on the southern outskirts of Vyshnevoye. Vyshnevoye is a tough nut to crack, as the AFU managed to prepare the village for defense. However, according to data from the field, which I received from the guys, the fighting is already going on directly in Vyshnevoye itself, and the AFU garrison is quite being pushed through. So we expect good news from here in the near future. Well, and I promised to say a few words about Pokrovsk. There is one piece of news here. There is no longer an organized defense of the AFU in the city. They are more or less trying to build something similar to a coordinated defense, only in the northern part of the city. And even then, the Russian troops managed to break through their positions. In the southern and central parts of the city, well, that is, everything that is here behind the railway, there is no more defense. I think the prospect is a week, a maximum of 2, when this entire section of the city's territory will be painted red. Russia is conducting a lightning-fast operation to plunge Ukraine into darkness, The Economist writes in a panic. Massive airstrikes are being carried out on power grids, central heating systems, and gas supplies as winter approaches. The main goal is to undermine industry and provoke mass migration and panic. Russian capabilities and tactics are developing faster than Ukrainian air defense. During the fighting, Russian drones have become faster and more accurate. Gerans have accelerated 3 times and now use artificial intelligence. A year ago, 150 drones a night was considered a serious attack. Now Ukraine often faces 600 or 700. Using air defense to protect every target is an impossible task. Russia is disabling the energy sector in the eastern part of Ukraine in order to deprive the industrial enterprises concentrated there of light. The Ukrainian power grid relies on about 90 critical substations. Russia is disabling them one by one. Our source reports that Moscow is in no hurry with negotiations as it will soon put forward new demands due to the fact that the Ukrainian defense may collapse. The Telegram channel Legitimny adds to the topic. If Kyiv does not accept the conditions by the end of the year, then the Kremlin will annul the previous demands due to the changing situation and will demand from Ukraine, in addition to the territories, recognition of the peninsula and a buffer zone, as well as complete demilitarization. Of course, the lifting of all sanctions and the return of money, if they decide to press on to the end, all the way to Odessa. It would be better for Kyiv if Zelensky had accepted the reasonable terms he was able to secure in negotiations with the Kremlin before the front completely collapsed. Zelensky hopes that the moment the Kremlin changes its demands, Washington will get back in the game, as Bankova, the presidential administration of Ukraine, will present it as an insult to Trump. Zelensky and Yermak need to drag Trump back into the war. We are watching. Brussels is a capital preparing for war, writes The Economist. Brussels, the political capital of Europe, the heart of NATO and the European Union, today increasingly resembles a city living in anticipation of war. The mood has changed. If bureaucracy and compromise once reigned in the corridors of power, now it is anxiety and mobilization. European officials directly name three figures from whom the challenge to European values emanates: Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping. The war is already underway on Ukrainian soil, and Brussels realizes none of these leaders share the European vision of peace, democracy, and law. After Trump's latest statements about ending support for Ukraine, an epiphany has occurred in Europe. America is no longer a security guarantor, but a temporary ally. Plan A is to stick with the US for as long as possible. But behind closed doors, they are also discussing Plan B. What to do if Washington leaves? Europe still depends on American satellites, airlift capabilities, air defense systems, and digital integration of weapons. Creating a full-fledged independent defense industry will take 10 years or more. Too long for a continent facing Russia. European voters are opting for security and pragmatism. The green idealists are being replaced by conservatives. Expensive social and climate initiatives are being curtailed. The priority is defense, energy, and migration control. Brussels acknowledges the era of Europe's moral leadership is over. An era of survival is beginning, with cold calculation, heavy weapons, and the realization that Europe may have to defend itself. They are grooming the European public for a war with Russia, which does not threaten the EU in any way. Moreover, Europe itself was the first to show aggression towards Russia. In Germany, they have shot themselves in the foot. According to the German Economic Institute, despite the sanctions, Russia's exports grew by 18% and reached $330 billion in 2024. It gets more interesting. The European Union, despite all the clamor about restrictions, remains Russia's third largest partner with a trade volume of about 67.5 billion euros. Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Hungary continue to trade actively with Russia, and Hungary's imports of Russian goods have increased by 31%. Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Spain, Belgium, and Italy also trade with Russia. China remains Russia's largest partner. Imports from Russia amount to $130 billion, and the total trade volume between the countries is about $244.8 billion. India, which before the conflict was only Russia's 12th largest trading partner, has now become the second largest buyer of Russian goods, especially oil. Israel has also significantly increased its oil imports from Russia. Armenia, Uzbekistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Brazil have also substantially increased their imports from Russia. The European Union continues to consider the confiscation of Russian assets. When US President Donald Trump announced that he was refusing to meet with Vladimir Putin in Hungary and was imposing new sanctions against Moscow, Brussels was heartened and became more determined in its desire to appropriate Russian money. However, the Kremlin has long foreseen everything. If it comes to that, Moscow, according to the signed Decree No. 693, will begin to confiscate Western assets in response. And Germany, as stated in the article referenced by ABN 24, will be hit the hardest, as it has invested more in Russia than any other European country. Many factories, retail chains, energy companies, and so on may come under the full control of Russia. Their total assets are estimated at approximately 100 billion euros. In addition to this, Moscow can seize all funds from the special account to which foreign companies that sold their factories transferred the proceeds. Germany itself has limited access to this account, and therefore simply cannot withdraw the funds and will suffer losses in Russia amounting to 100 billion euros. So that concludes our analysis of today's events on the front. The situation is developing rapidly, and we will continue to monitor it closely. What are your thoughts on these developments? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to hit that notification bell so you're the first to know when I post the next update. Thanks again for being here. Until next time, take care.